Good evening and welcome to the Journey Home. My name is Marcus Grodi, your host for this weekly live program. It's a great privilege to be with you. My privilege every week is to introduce to you men and women who, because of their great love for Jesus Christ, came home to the Catholic Church or came home for the first time, if that wasn't their tradition that they were brought up to. And my guest tonight is Scott McDermott. He's going to talk about his journey from atheism through a rough lifestyle, rough choices in lifestyle, but receiving the grace of God, opening his heart and coming not only to Jesus but to his church. He's the author of a book, Charles Carrollton of Carrollton, right?
Carroll of Carrollton, yeah.
And well, first of all, let me welcome you to Journey Home. It's
Thank
great.
you,
And how did you get your interest in Carroll? He was one of the signers of Declaration of Independence, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I call myself a moonlighting historian. I'm a librarian. I also write history on the side, and I'm very interested in the American Revolution and in American politics. And Charles Carroll was the only Catholic signer of the Declaration of Independence. And he was, a very well-known figure at the time, so I was just trying to bring that history, that bit of Catholic history back to light.
Which we've forgotten, many people have forgotten.
For the large part.
And of course, it wasn't an easy life for him being a Catholic in those days by any means. I think it became easier after the Revolution, but not before, right?
No, absolutely. He was very important in getting Catholics their civil rights in the new country, yes.
That's right. One of his sons, right? John Carroll was a son or a cousin?
His cousin was the first Archbishop of Baltimore, yes. That's right.
Before I ask you to begin, I forgot to mention the phone number, and I've got to do that because your phone calls are an important part of our program. So give us a call at 1-800-221-9460 if you got a question for Scott, or you can send us an email at journeyhome@EWTN.com. All right, Scott, every week I ask the guest to kind of bring us up to date, give us your spiritual background, childhood that before your conversion to the Catholic faith.
Mm-hmm. Well, I grew up mostly in Kentucky, and when I was 12 years old, we settled down in a small town, Mayfield, Kentucky. Now, my grandmother, my mother's side of the family, had been Catholic. My parents were not church-going people. So we lived there in the same town with my grandmother from the time I was 12. She was very influential to me. But I never did attend church regularly when I was growing up. And I had a strong reaction. Our town was largely Protestant and, very evangelical and very fundamentalist. And I reacted very negatively to that, partly because, I think I was very much trying to be an intellectual. I was really trying to be a super achiever. I was, identifying myself against, what I saw at that time as being, ignorant, superstition, all that sort of thing, and, I loudly proclaimed myself to be an atheist then from a very early age, and, I reacted very negatively to what I saw as, sort of hellfire and brimstone preaching. Now, that was the message that got through to me, at the time. Of course, I realized that, had I been, in, a churchgoer, I would have gotten a more complete version of the message. But that was sort of what I heard. So I reacted very negatively to that at the time.
You said your family wasn't a church-going family. Did they encourage this thinking in you, this move towards atheism, or was there just a divide between you and your parents on those issues? Or was it your own journey that led you off in that direction completely?
My parents were very protective in some ways, and they were very permissive in other ways, and so they were not really trying, I think, to encourage me towards any particular way of thinking, religious or non-religious. It was a little worrisome to them, I think, when I would get letters from people, because this was a small town, everybody knew I was kind of like the village atheist at that point. And so, I would get letters saying, please, convert before it's too late and things like this. And so that was, that was a little bit worrisome to them.
Did that nudge you in the other direction? Even deeper into your atheism, those kind of letters?
It did, it did, and maybe there was a more compassionate message that people were trying to give, and I just wasn't hearing it because I was also, I think, really pushing away God. I found the whole idea of God to be very overwhelming. You know, I didn't understand God as a loving father figure. You know, that was a hard concept for me. So I pushed him away and increasingly began to pursue my own way.
Right.
And also, you know, at that time I became aware early on, as soon as I began to develop into a man, that I had this attraction to other males, and that I had no attraction to women whatsoever. You know, so this was obviously, you know, shaping the way that I thought and experienced the world.
My guess is then that part of your movement in that direction was something that you kept from your family. It was really part of your own journey and your own struggle at that point. Did you? Here you were the town atheist. Okay, I'm just curious, was some of your striking out in these other, you might call them anti-cultural ways, at least of that more fundamentalist community, was that a part of this image of being kind of Mr. Atheist in your community? Was that important to you? Mm-hmm. Okay.
It was really important to me, like I said, to be, you know, the super achiever, you know, and I was trying to cover up, I think, my own insecurity, my own emptiness, by entering every contest, every academic contest, you know, really trying to get esteem from other people in that way. And inside, you know, I was very, very empty, lost, and confused. But I felt as long as I could somehow maintain that public image, you know, everything would be okay. Right. And actually, I had a very, my public image was of someone who was very, I don't want to say chaste exactly, but good. You know, I didn't go out drinking, I didn't go out partying, you know. I remember once a friend of mine who was a Christian said to me, you know, it's such a shame you're an atheist because you would be a really good Christian, you know. And, you know, and that was, you know, kind of what I was seeing was, you know, I told myself, well, these people are hypocrites. They're not living up to this. They can't live up to it. And inside, you know, I was deeply confused. I didn't really have anyone to turn to really help me with this problem, right. You know, who I felt comfortable with. So I just sort of drifted deeper, I think, into my own inner world, you know, far away from any church influence or anyone who could really reach out to me. And that process continued when I went to college at Cornell University, which was very far away from my home. And I got into a, you know, obviously very secular environment, you know, where all sorts of things were accepted, you know, and, you know, including the gay lifestyle. And so I immediately began to go very deep into that, to go deep into, you know, political activism and all sorts of things like that.
Yeah. I was just thinking how the devil really lies to us. It was interesting then that Christian saw your facade and was impressed by the facade, but couldn't see within, or your private life. And I'm sure that was building up to explode within you too. That you were recognizing not the hypocrisy of these others, but here you were with this accepted facade, but yet you knew how you felt inside and what you were doing in private. You know, I mean,
exactly.
There's the lie of the devil.
Exactly, but you know, they say the devil can transform himself into an angel of light, and that's so true of the gay lifestyle, because when you look at these people, they get into this sort of mode where they realize they have to be very courageous. They have to show a lot of fortitude, actually, and a lot of perseverance in order to get into this lifestyle and to come out to other people and all of this. So there are some good qualities that are there that are being used for the service of the devil. Yeah. And so it comes to seem like a very heroic thing, you know, that I'm courageously defying the world, and I need to stick to this, and if I were to leave this, you know, I'm a traitor somehow.
Yeah. If you don't have a foundation to define what is good, and you can redefine good, right, by your sensuality, then again, you can, like you said, you can come up with this noble view. This person is defending the rights of these people.
Exactly, and I think gay people are very good at projecting this image, and a lot of times gay people, homosexuals, are very gifted people. You know, they may be very intellectual, they may be very artistic, and so And they're, they project that, as I did, and other people see that, and they see those good qualities, and they're seduced into thinking that, oh, this must be a very, healthy, wholesome way to live, and they don't see the inner turmoil. They don't see the psychological distress, the problems, the alcoholism, all the other things that go along with this lifestyle.
We may get to it later, but in a book that you're hoping to write, you give me the wonderful private beginnings of this book, which is an excellent book, and I will encourage you to do that. But one thing you did talk about was that there are these statements that people will make about the gay lifestyle that are subsequently proven completely wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But people remember the statement and not the reality and the proof.
That's true. And there was that famous study that came out in 1991 by Simon LeVay, where he supposedly proved that homosexuality was inborn, it was genetic, because he examined 19 deceased cadavers, and he found these differences. Well, that was reported front page in the newspaper. It was subsequently, it was never replicated. The study was never replicated. You didn't hear about that. You didn't hear about whenever somebody makes a link like that, it's on the front page. When it's disproven, you don't hear about it.
Yeah. Of course, the beauty of being able to make, quote, a connection to genetics,
Mm-hmm.
well, then it's not my fault.
Right, exactly.
I can't help how I am. And of course, all kinds of aberrant lifestyles are looking for some excuse to say it's not their fault. I couldn't help it. And so the devil lies once again. One other question before we go on. Interesting, the twist on the image of being kind of Mr. Atheist in a small community, that finding one's self-esteem
Mm-hmm.
in that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, as you look back, was there also a dichotomy there between this image? Was there within ever, during those years, the seed of, did you recognize the seed of God's existence, or was there just a blank, had you completely blanked him out of any thought
Mm-hmm.
during those years?
Well, looking back on it, there are moments, and once I got to college, I realized there were moments when I really, realized I was empty. I remember one time at a party, drinking, and I, began to actually cry, and I started to pray. This came out of the blue. I was praying, Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata mundi, miserere nobis. Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, have mercy on us. And, because I had heard that in some music and things like that. I was always interested in Catholic writers. Also, I had a great love for the works of Flannery O'Connor, and also especially Evelyn Waugh. And I read the novel Brideshead Revisited a number of times, and I didn't really know at the time why I love this book so much. It's about, it's really about two homosexual men, one of whom stays in that lifestyle, and the other of whom converts to Catholicism and goes through a process and becomes heterosexual. And that was a very powerful book for me, but I didn't really know why at the time. And I did come back to that later. It's
interesting how God does plant seeds.
Absolutely.
It sounds like we're at the stage of my asking you, what is it, open your heart? Because you mentioned one of them. It was this time reading some of these Catholic authors. What were the things that started turning the tide in your life
Mm-hmm.
towards Christ and His church?
Well, I think the very first thing was actually my experience of depression. Because when I was 20 years old, I was in college, and I was going along in the lifestyle. I was a gay activist. I was involved in all kinds of things, and not living in a very healthy way at all. And suddenly, I got very depressed. I started to have panic attacks, and I had to leave school. And that, I see in hindsight, is something that was really a tremendous grace for me. It's almost like God, pulling me out. At the time, it was very painful, but looking back on it, I say God brought me to a screeching halt and made me start to look, at my life and what I was doing. So after that happened, I did go back to college. I did resume my gay lifestyle, but I was also, very much on a quest for truth, because at Cornell at the time, there really weren't any religious people to speak of. And not only that, but most of the professors there were teaching, some modern academic trends, like, for example, what's called deconstruction, this idea that it's impossible to make any kind of meaningful statement about anything using language. They see language as being, carrying no meaning. And I really began to question that. And I said, first of all, well, if you're making that statement that it's impossible to make a true statement, then your statement can't be true either, So I realized, and I realized that was, just put us back to square one. And I realized too that I felt something strongly within myself that at the time, I identified with homosexuality, that was something very significant. And I wanted to get to the bottom of that. First of all, I felt there was some truth of human behavior, human experience that I really wanted to understand and be able to articulate. And so I didn't know what the truth was. I would never, ever have thought of it as being Jesus Christ or being in the Catholic Church, because that was totally foreign to me. But I was ready, I was open and questioning to try to find, what the truth was. I had tried every, Marxism, all this other stuff, and I wanted to know the truth. So I went to one summer. This was the summer of 1991. I was 23 years old. I took a trip out west on a research trip out west to Utah and Colorado, and I was all by myself, and I, was looking at the mountains. I visited Utah. I was actually quite impressed with the Mormons and the culture that they have there in a way. I was, I was increasingly becoming more open. I realized that the world was a little bit bigger than my own little preoccupations. So I got back to Ithaca, where Cornell is, and my friends were away for the summer, and I started reading again, and I was reading Waugh, I was reading Flannery O'Connor, and I was also reading Thomas Merton, The Seven-Story Mountain. That book had a tremendous impact on me. I was kind of unusual in that I didn't have another person who was really leading me to the faith, and maybe I was so proud and so intellectual, and all of that it would have been impossible. But through those writers, I started to ask questions. Then I went to the local Catholic church, and I walked in the door, and I knew there was something going on in that church. I had to know what it was. And I actually felt, my first reaction was to feel ashamed, in a sense. I felt like, I'm not really worthy to be here somehow, and I wanted to leave. I wanted to run away from that. And but I stayed, and I kept, coming back because I knew there was something there. I tried to go to the local Episcopal church, and I saw all the same people that I saw at Cornell. I heard the same message. It was not, there was nothing there that was special like what I felt when I was in the real presence. So I kept going back, and I would mostly pray in front of a statue of Mary, the Blessed Mother, because, like I said, I had a hard time experiencing God as a loving father figure, and at the time I felt more comfortable approaching Jesus through Mary. So I would go and I would pray, and then I started to pray. Somehow I started to pray the Rosary, and that was when I knew, I really knew that there was something there. It was like my spirit opened up. I started to pray. Meanwhile, my friends are starting to come back to town. We're getting, to the end of the summer, and I started talking to people about this, and it was like I had, I was on Mars. They couldn't believe it. What? Because also I was a member of this group called ACT UP, which I'm sure many of your viewers have heard of, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. We had a local chapter in Ithaca, and this was the group that desecrated the Blessed Sacrament in St. Patrick's Cathedral. Fortunately, I was not there. There was a tremendous amount of hatred directed towards the Catholic Church. And again, I go back to that feeling of gay men, where they desire to be with, to receive affection from a male, and at the same time, they have a lot of anger, a lot of repressed anger, so they're pushing away, that real presence of God, that was certainly my experience. So my friends from ACT UP were telling me, what are you doing? This is absolutely crazy. And I started to get confused again. And one day I remember, this was at the very end of the summer, I was lying in my bed and I was thinking, should I go to Mass? And, I was lying there. Finally I got up and I, ran to Mass for what I thought was the time for Mass. About halfway there, I looked down, I realized I was wearing my ACT UP t-shirt.
Oops.
But by God's grace, I went ahead and went into the church. But when I got there, everybody was leaving because, unbeknownst to me, they had switched from their summer schedule to their regular schedule. And when I came in, they were getting ready to have a baptism of an infant. And so I walked up. There was a man there handing out programs. He looked at me, I looked at him. He looked at my t-shirt. I looked at him, and he handed me a program and, told me to come in. So,
and
that...
There's a lot in that.
Sorry?
There's a lot in that.
Yes.
In that experience, that
Yes.
expression of the faith.
Yeah, it was a beautiful moment, just, I don't know who that man was, but I think of him, and I think, that he really opened a door for me then. And I think about also all the other people. If you're out there and you're praying for homosexuals to be converted, atheists to be converted, and you don't see any results, somebody prayed for me, and there was a result, and all that. So anyway, I went in, I was able to recite the baptismal creed. For the first time, I was able to really proclaim my own faith, and then I went to the priest there in Immaculate Conception Parish in Ithaca, and I asked to enter into the RCIA program. And I was accepted. I went through, and I was baptized at the Easter Vigil in 1992.
I go back to that, the outreach of that man. Maybe he was an angel, in other words, who knows who he was, but
Yes.
It was an expression of the church's desire to reach out.
Yes.
And that statement of, we'll accept you as you are, but we don't want you to stay the way you are. We don't
Exactly.
expect you to stay, because the reality of growing in holiness, in obedience to the church, but yet we don't expect you to be perfect to come through these doors.
Well, it's been said so many times, hate the sin, but love the sinner, and be, very clear about that. But yes, do love the sinner and do reach out to the sinner.
When you were going through that process, were you quite aware of the church's teaching on the issues that you were struggling with?
Yes.
Okay. Was that a formidable barrier to?
It was a huge barrier, and it actually continued to be a barrier, I'm sorry to say, after my baptism, because I had decided, that at first I was going to be a cafeteria Catholic, and I was going to pick this and choose this and leave this other behind. And I had some good priests who were saying to me, no, the priest in the parish there said, you can change. And he was the first person to ever tell me that, and I didn't believe that at the time. But then I had other influences, people who were saying, no, it's okay, you can live in the gay lifestyle and still be a Catholic. And so I was very confused.
Mixed messages.
Yes. And, again, I regret to say that about 1 year after my baptism, I fell back into sin. And at that point, I really began soul searching, because I began to understand that I could not go ahead and both be gay, be actively in the homosexual lifestyle, and profess to be a Catholic. And so I started to question and really to pray about that. And a couple things happened. First of all, I fell in with a group of really great charismatic people, actually, at Our Lady of Refuge Parish in Brooklyn, New York, and they were very orthodox about the teachings of the church. And also, one of them there, who we became good friends, was involved in psychology, and he was the first one to really begin telling me the basis for the Catholic teachings, and to really start to explain to me why the church teaches this, and to open my eyes about that. because the homosexuality is like this. It's almost like being in a cave, and it's like there's a shaft of light, coming into the cave, one shaft of light, and that is homosexual love. Okay, the light that you see. And let's say someone else comes into the cave, and he sees you there in your little shaft of light, and he says, "But look, outside the cave, if you just step out of it, there's bright daylight, sunshine, it's great, this is terrible, come outside." And, the homosexual person's first reaction is to say, "What, give up my shaft of light, give up my ray of light?" Because that's all they know. That's all I knew, in a sense. That was the only kind of love I knew. So it took a lot of explaining for me to say, no, it really is better outside of this lifestyle. You really can change, you really can be masculine. You can discover that part of yourself that was repressed, split off. And so that was great. And then I remember also when, a bell went off for me, I was visiting a friend and I was reading, he had a copy of the New Yorker there. There was an article in there about alcoholism. And it was talking about how alcoholics frequently experience, addictive personality traits from a very early age. And they experience this drive, this addictive drive from a very early age. And I said to myself, wait a minute, you mean you can experience something from an early age for a long period of time and it's still not healthy, And I understood then, that just because you feel something strongly for a long time does not make it right. And it doesn't mean that you have to live with the negative effects of it forever.
It seems like that wonderful voice of that priest that clearly said to you can change.
Yes.
Was also a very important turning place.
It was, and
because that's not an idea that's accepted within the homosexual community, is it?
Oh, it's something that they fight against, militantly, even though if you look at psychological studies going back for decades, many, Anna Freud, the daughter of Sigmund Freud, was going around in the 1950s telling about how she was curing homosexuals. Masters and Johnson reported back in the 70s that they had reoriented more than 2/3 of homosexuals who came to them for treatment. So there is hope, and many people have gone this path. And I was very blessed because Chris, my friend in the charismatic movement, led me to a wonderful therapist, Jolanta Idzik, who has really saved my life on a number of occasions, and I'm still in therapy with her, very strong Orthodox Catholic. So these people do exist, help is available. The Courage Group is out there doing wonderful things, Exodus International. So there really isn't any reason why anybody needs to stay. I'll just say lastly that my conversion, I don't feel my conversion to Christianity was really complete until I began to experience heterosexual feelings for women, because before, I didn't, that was just something I totally blocked out of my life. I rejected it, and I saw female love as being this kind of draining thing. I didn't want any part of it. When I first began to experience that desire for women, it was like, again, it was like my spirit opened up. Yeah. I understood, I was part of nature, I was part of the world, and the homosexual desires began to go away and diminish. I don't claim that they're totally gone, but they're much less strong, and the heterosexual desire is there strongly, so it is possible to change.
All right, Scott, thanks a lot. Let's take a break. We're back just a minute with your questions for Scott, and then the questions about the journey of faith. We'll see you in a bit. Welcome back to the Journey Home. Our guest tonight is Scott McDermott, and we've already have an email that comes from Edwin in Cleveland, Ohio. And he asked, Marcus and Scott, like you, Scott, I had once lived in the gay lifestyle. I had always believed that it was due to my lack of Catholic upbringing. If you had had a stronger upbringing in your Catholic faith, would you have fallen into the gay lifestyle? I am now living a chaste life. Thank you for your testimony. And thank you for your email, Edwin.
Well, that's an excellent question. It's, I think it's hard to say. I think obviously growing up in the Catholic Church is a real benefit, with the benefit of the sacraments, the sacrament of penance, the Eucharist and baptism. So yes, I like to think, that it, possibly it would have. But then again, we look at our church and we see that there is this problem, that keeps coming up, and it's obviously coming up in the media. So it can happen, obviously within the church, in spite of the best intentions of people. And so this is why we really need to become well educated and aware. And this is why priests need to talk about this in the confessional and from the pulpit. And this is why, faithful Catholics need to start groups of courage and encourage in their parishes and reach out, because we're everybody is suffering from this problem right now, and everybody needs to really come together and try to fix it, because it can be helped, it can be fixed.
Would you say that behind this, this issue of homosexuality has been around, on the one hand, forever. We see it referenced in the Middle Ages and even the days of the church and other writings. Obviously in the Old Testament it's referred to. But yet it seems to be on the increase worldwide. Would you see it stems from a crisis of fatherhood?
I think that's a big part of it, what's called the father hunger, with fathers who are not available to their children. I don't want to,
Right.
play the blame game and blame it all, but I think that's a major problem. I think that the number one thing that parents can do to sort of try to prevent this is just to work on their relationship with each other. I think a lot of times that if the relationship is not good there, it's not strong, the temptation is for one parent, the mother perhaps, to make the male son into sort of her confidant, and that often results in homosexuality in a certain way. So yes, there are a lot of our family issues are very much tied into this.
All right. Let's take our first caller. This is Patrick from Florida. Hello, Patrick. What's your question for us tonight?
Hi, my question is, I have an atheist friend, and I was just wondering how to start evangelizing to him without stepping on his toes. I don't think giving up on their friendship would be right. So I was just looking for advice.
Great, Patrick. Great question.
That's wonderful. I think that you just by giving your faithful witness to him, when I was an atheist, I really didn't want to listen, and it was, again, like I said, I was pushing God away. I wanted to keep him away. So I think that to really try to preach to him all the time might be a mistake. On the other hand, you can just be with him as a friend, obviously not approving of everything perhaps he does, but be there for him as a friend. And then there are going to be moments when he's going to turn to you, and you're going to be able to witness and explain the faith to him.
Okay. He had that friendship. I've always believed in relational evangelization anyway. It's the most important key.
Yes.
It could be also the key in the other direction too, the friendships that people make. But when if he has a great friendship with this man, that's the blessing right there, and nurture that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. Let's take our next caller. This is Janet from Wisconsin. Hello, Janet. What's your question?
Hi. I have a son a 20-year-old son who says that he is gay, and I'm wondering what I can say to him, or what I can do. When he was a little boy, he would say the rosary on his own, and I was thinking maybe of saying to him, if you could, just say the rosary for a week and try to figure out what God is trying to tell you about the choice you have made. But I don't know what to say to him or how to approach him. I've talked to him about it, but I don't know.
Was this let me ask you, just continuing on the question, Was your discovery of this for your son, was it sudden, or did it grow over time? Or?
Well, when he was 17, he said that he thought he was bi, you know, and then he's at college. He's in college, but his friendships are more within that gay community, and you know, we've had conversations, and he just doesn't seem to get it.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, and thank you very much for calling. I think, well, the first thing that sounds very positive is that he is confiding in you, and it seems that he does want to talk to you about this, and he wants you to be there with him. And so I think there's a lot you can do. First of all, just to pray, like St. Monica did for St. Augustine, you know, for so long. Pray, keep praying in faith, and let him know that you love him very much. You accept him for who he is. You don't accept all the choices that he's making. You know, try to, I think there's a lot of forgiveness and healing that has to go on. You know, looking at the past, not with an eye to blaming, but with an eye to understanding and trying to obtain forgiveness and healing, you know, for, you know, family relations in the past. And I think that also I would recommend that you get in touch with the group Encourage, which is a group of Catholics who are parents and friends of lesbians and gays. This is kind of a sister group to Courage, you know, and they're ministering in spirit and in truth. It's a great group.
Let me ask you a question, and I might be completely wrong in this, but I'm wondering if part of the problem we're seeing in the increase in homosexuality is because we live in a culture that really has no category in place for people that have a vocation to singleness. And that maybe people, in fact, their vocation is to a celibate lifestyle, but because there's no category for that, then it's hard for them to figure out how to live that out. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't mean that a person who's celibate doesn't have a heterosexual drive, but yet their calling was to be celibate. But in our culture, you know,
I think that's a really crucial point, because I think what happens a lot of times is that, you know, I think young men especially grow up and they may have qualities of being intellectual. They like art, they like music. You know, in former times, you know, I think parents would have looked at that and they would have, you know, accepted that and tried to, and said, oh, you know, maybe this child has a vocation to the priesthood, or has a, you know, is just kind of special, has a gift to give to the church, you know. Now, you know, I think in our culture there's so much anxiety about masculinity, and you know, people look at that and they say, you know, oh, you know, there's a lot of anxiety about those kinds of gifts, you know. So if you want to, you know, your child to become a homosexual, you know, try, you know, you should definitely not accept him for those gifts. You should try to force him into a male stereotype, is what I'm, you know, actually, you know, I'm saying definitely accept the child, affirm the child for who he is, you know, and then help him to develop into a strong man or into a strong woman with those special gifts.
So I'm also even thinking in the other side, in the female issue. In other words, women who, in a culture that pushes, that kind of believes that every woman ought to be married. You know, but if in fact God has called certain women to be celibate, to have a single life, again, we have a culture that pushes them into that. And I'm wondering if that's also led many into the lesbian lifestyle. You know?
Yeah, well, again, we have this feminism in our culture, and it really downgrades women. You know, it downgrades femininity, and it, you know, and it says to them that you're not adequate unless you are, you know, playing some kind of strong masculine role. Whereas the church has been great for women over the years, and they've had incredible power in the church over the years.
That's right. That's right. They're great calling. Okay, let's take this next email. This comes from Laura. Thank you for your email, Laura. Dear Scott, you said you first approached Jesus through Mary. When did you begin to experience directly a relationship with our loving Father and our Lord Jesus?
Well, it was a long process, and I think what happened was, first, you know, I started praying the rosary. I started praying through Mary, I was going to Mass, and then, when I was involved with the charismatic movement, I began to experience the Holy Spirit more. But I would go to Eucharistic adoration, and something wasn't quite right. I still felt that feeling that I first felt when I walked into the church, almost like a feeling of shame, and again, that was my projection of, my image of what Jesus as a man was like, what God the Father was like. And so over time, I kept going to adoration, I kept praying for that grace to know him, and really through the Blessed Sacrament, I came to know Jesus as my therapy progressed, as I forgave, as I experienced healing. I was able to approach God and then, accept Jesus, for what he was, which was, a friend who was leading me to a new life, someone who was encouraging me to be the man, that he made me to be, a role model, and a loving father.
All right, great. Let's take our next email. This comes from Dennis. I am a physician, and it's refreshing to hear someone speak of homosexuality in this light. Can you comment on the subculture that surrounds the lifestyle? Thanks for your email, Dennis.
It's horrifying. If I were to go into all the details, the literature is out there, and as a doctor, I'm sure you're aware of some of the horrible medical problems, even before AIDS, from the practices that people were engaging in and still are engaging in. The lifestyle hasn't changed that much. If you study the scientific literature, there's been some change, but not very much. It's a compulsion, and it's not something that people are in rational control of. So they're still exposing themselves to all kinds of risky behaviors that, again, I can't go into. I'll just tell you a story. Once when I was in college, there was a gentleman who was staying as a visitor in our house, and he was gay, and someone asked him, "How do you know you're gay?" And he replied very calmly, "I know I'm gay because I've had sex with 8 women and more than 2,000 men." And if you look at the statistics, you see that gay men have this unbelievable, promiscuity that has changed somewhat, but not very much since the advent of AIDS.
In fact, maybe talk a bit about, all this move in state governments to open up the door to gay marriage, but the reality is that the promiscuity and the commitment to a vow of loyalty is, is not very good in that lifestyle, right? I mean, it's not very consistent.
It can't be, for a couple of reasons. First of all, there's the ambivalence, there's that desire to get love and affirmation from a person of the same sex, and at the same time there's usually a lot of repressed anger at people of the same sex who have rejected them, over the years, and so there's that dynamic, going on in the relationship, and then there's just a lot going on underneath the surface. In 1984, there was a study done by a couple of scientists named McWhirter and Madison called the Male Couple, and they tracked 500 male couples, and what they discovered was that after 5 years in the relationship, every single one of the couples had made a decision to allow sexual relationships outside the relationship. And here's the second reason that I lost for a minute why gay relationships can't work, and at least in the gay male community. The gay man is looking for someone who's really masculine, someone who's going to fill that role of masculine affirmation that he never got. But obviously he's in a community with other gay men, who are not very masculine. So the partner is always going to fall short, and so the man is going to pursue his own fantasy of what he wants, and so he's going to pursue that outside of the relationship.
Now, all the stuff that you just said within the gay community, they deny.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of the PR campaign that's going on now, is to try to make it all look, look great, like it's wholesome, mom and pop apple pie.
I'm amazed at the increased television programs that just boldly present that lifestyle without any apology.
Yes, and and I'm here to say it's really not like that. If you look at the statistics of alcoholism, drug abuse, depression, like I experienced, suicide, all much higher in the gay lifestyle. And, you know, we Catholics need to not be afraid to go out and say, you know, no, heterosexuality is the norm, it's healthy, you know. But again, like that mother who was trying to reach out to her son, you know, I think as people get older in the lifestyle, they may begin to question, and they may see their friends getting married, and they may say, I'm really missing out on this whole dimension of reality. So that's, you know, a good opportunity. If you're a family, you know, if you're a family person out there and you want to try to help this problem, you know, reach out to somebody, you know, invite, invite them to socialize or whatever, and try to let them see, you know, how beautiful, how loving, you know, a Christian family life is.
In fact, let's take this email, which confirms what you've just said. This comes from Ann. She says, Scott, God bless you, and thank you for your sharing your spiritual journey this evening. My brother, shortly after my mother died, he announced he was homosexual and is living the lie today. I pray for him all the time and try to accept him as I know God does love the sinner, but I am so angry for the choices that he has made for himself and the lifestyle that I can't understand. I feel so powerless, but I know God is all-powerful, and just maybe my prayers will help somehow. Thank you, and God bless you, Ann. Thank you, Ann, for your email, and God bless you, because prayers really do make a difference, Scott.
Oh, yes, and I think of what St. Ambrose said to St. Monica, you know, these tears must be answered, you know, that beautiful commitment, you know, that she has to her brother. Just keep praying and hoping.
Because as you said, that word that isn't heard in that community very often is this, is the truth that a person can change. A person can forget what lies behind and move on, right?
Well, yes. I mean, you know, you look at it this way. You know, the process of becoming a man or a woman is, you know, it's learned, it's education, and it should start, you know, very early, and it should progress through the teenage years, and that's the normal thing. But if for some reason someone goes astray in that first progression, they can still learn it. Mm-hmm. If something can be learned, it can be learned, you know, sooner or later, and it is possible. It's not easy. You know, it's really not easy to do. The transformation may not be total, but it can be done.
Let's see if we get this email in, because I wanted to ask this too, because this is interesting. It comes from Nellie in Cleveland, Ohio. Dear Marcus and Scott, I wanted to ask Scott how exactly he came across the Catholic writers he began to read, i.e. Flannery O'Connor, Thomas Merton, etc., while on his journey in Jesus through Mary. Nellie, thank you. How did you get interested in those authors? Do you remember?
Well, I think it must have just been grace, you know, and my mother, you know, is a great reader, and my parents both encouraged me to get, you know, a good education, and so I was reading a lot, and I came across those writers. I watched the TV series of Brideshead Revisited. Sure. Also. And
did you realize they were Catholic writers at the time, per se, or did you just like them as writers?
I just liked them as writers, and I saw something profound there that I, you know, came back to.
All right. Okay, Scott, thank you. We're going to take another break. Scott and I will be back in just a minute for some more words for the journey home. Wanted to make sure that I took a moment to remind you of Scott's book, Charles Carroll of Carrollton, Faithful Revolutionary. And I mean, it sounds fascinating because, again, that's one of the just proof that the founders of our country, the thing that they signed, established some firm foundation for natural law. Mm-hmm. And but in some ways that maybe our Supreme Court and others have lost track of. You know, got distant from the signers of the Declaration of Independence, and the reality is one of them was a good, faithful Catholic. And
absolutely. Well, I think if you look at the Supreme Court decision we had this summer, they were trying to, you know, say that because of the right of privacy, you know, homosexuals had a right to sodomy. If you look at the history of that right to privacy, prior to 1963, it was always used to protect the family and the home. You know, so we Catholics need to reclaim that tradition, you know, that none of the founders would have understood. You know, they all had a very clear concept of natural law. They weren't all Orthodox Christians, but they had a clear philosophical idea of natural law and what was moral for human beings to do.
Scott, in closing, talk to the audience a little bit about how your Catholicism, your growth in Catholicism has strengthened your faith in Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think if it hadn't been for the clear Catholic moral teaching on this issue, I don't believe I would have remained a Christian. You know, I would have tried to fudge on the issue, you know, to be a Christian, but at the same time to be gay. And when I made that decision that I had to follow the teachings of the Catholic Church, that was really the beginning of my walk, you know, with Jesus. And you know, and I was thinking about the rich young man, the one who had in the Gospels, whom Jesus asked to give up that thing that was most precious to him and come follow me. And if it hadn't been for the teaching of the Catholic Church, the clear teaching on this issue, I wouldn't have been inspired to give up the thing that was holding me back from Jesus, and I certainly wouldn't have followed him.
You remind me also of that text in Second Corinthians that talks about that we're comforted that we might comfort others.
Yes.
And you know, the Lord has on the one hand allowed you to experience some things, but yet equip you in a very unique way to be able to minister to others, as you've ministered tonight to our audience. And I thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you for your witness that you've given us, and you know, our prayer in your work and in your future publishing ventures. You know, hope we hear about that book that you've got on the table here, maybe in a year or two. We'll keep that in our prayers. So thank you,
Marcus. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us on the journey home. You know, there's an old statement. I don't know who said it first, but it's a blessed statement that we need to take to heart. It was that statement, "But for the grace of God go I." And it's an important statement because it's so easy for us sometimes to say, boy, you know, look at that person, and mea culpa. But for the grace of God go I. And we must never be blind to how God has touched our life by grace, pulled us out of our own hell, the different things we've got ourselves into, and open our hearts to His grace and love. And Scott's witness to us is a reminder of God's great love and mercy, who can change us into the kind of person He wants us to be by His grace and His assistance. God bless. We'll see you again next week.